Hello and welcome to Candidates on the Clock, sponsored by the Newton County Chamber of Commerce. I'm your host, Lanier Sims. Today we're joined by Dr. Paul Broun, that is running for U.S. Congress, District 10. Dr. Brown, could you take a couple minutes and tell the citizens more about you?
Certainly. I served in the U.S. Congress for 4 terms. And what's so important, we've got a lot of people running this race, and as you evaluate who you're going to vote for, let me tell you why hopefully will deserve your vote. I get my seniority back, which is absolutely critical for the people of this district, state, and nation. I was the chairman of the Science Investigations Committee when I was in the U.S. House of Representatives, and I should be able to get that chairmanship back. So I'll be back in leadership, and chairing that committee as a medical doctor, as a scientist, chairman of that committee, I'm uniquely positioned. I think the Lord opened up this opportunity for me to make sure we never, ever shut our country down and shut our economy down like we have over the last 2 years. It must never happen again. And there's no one running in this race. In fact, I don't know of anybody in the country that can do what I can and will do when I get back to Congress. I was rated as the most fiscally conservative member of the entire U.S. House of Representatives. So I have a proven fiscally conservative history. I personally passed into law more spending cuts than any other member of Congress, Lanier. And we've just got to stop this out of control spending. We see all of this inflation and the high cost of living that we're all suffering under. And it's being caused principally by this out of control spending that Congress has been engaged in, the debt that is just totally unsustainable, as well as the Federal Reserve policies that are so bad that is creating this inflation. It's got to stop. We've got to deal with this out of control debt. I want to get rid of entirely get rid of the Federal Reserve and go back to sound money policy. And I've got bills to do that. In fact, I introduced when I was there, Congressman Ron Paul, Dr. Ron Paul, my friend, gave me his audit the Fed bill when he left. I passed it in the U.S. House with overwhelming bipartisan support. I don't remember the exact numbers. It's like 333 to 98. So I had a lot of Democrats that were on the bill with me. I had a tremendous bipartisan vote. We passed it. I actually got more votes than Ron Paul did when he passed it. But it was one of a trio of bills. The second one was to get rid of the Federal Reserve totally and go back to sound money policy, to go back to the gold and silver standards so we don't have this happen ever again. So those are some things, just a few of the things that separate me from all these other candidates running. And since we're here at the Chamber, economic development has been a huge issue for me. In fact, my dad was in the state Senate for 38 years from Athens, Georgia, where I grew up. And he focused on 2 things, economic development as well as education. And those are part of my DNA. I started the process that brought Caterpillar to Georgia and did the same thing with Baxter Pharmaceuticals here in Newton County, and it's been such a huge boom for the economic base of Newton County as well as Walton County, and I'll continue to do the same. I don't know of any congressman or any U.S. senator that has done what I've done to bring jobs and industry to Georgia.
Okay, thank you. As you're aware, we had citizens to submit some questions,
Right.
So we're just going to dive right in. What are your thoughts or your views on addressing climate change?
Well, recently in the polls, it looks like Joe Biden is underwater, so maybe we are getting ocean levels rising because of that. God tells us in His Word that we have to be good stewards of our environment, and there's no question about it. If you look at what's happened over the last few years, we have reduced across the nation our carbon footprint and the carbon emissions, and we need to continue to do that. But frankly, the states should be doing those things to make sure we have a good, clean Georgia, have the air clean, the water clean here in Georgia. I want to get rid of the EPA. Let's let the Georgia Environmental Protection Division take care of those things here in Georgia. And frankly, that's the best way to do it. And it's the most constitutional way of doing it as well. So I'll do everything I can to make sure that I, as a federal representative, can get the Georgia EPD to to make sure that we have clean water and clean air and that all Georgians can live in a clean environment.
Thank you. As you know, the Build Back Better bill is currently stalled in Congress. What provisions, if any, would you do to support, or what are your views on getting it unstuck?
That's a radical leftist agenda, and it doesn't really have to do with Build Back Better. It has to do with totally changing our economy, totally changing our government, totally changing our way of life. That bill needs to die. But we did need to have a strong infrastructure here. And in fact, I want to get rid of the Department of Transportation as well. Let's keep those dollars here. Georgia is a donor state. And in fact, we get back proportionally 90 cents on the dollar of all of our transportation taxes that go to Washington, D.C. And we're paying for all those bureaucrats up there as well. Let's close down the Department of Transportation. Let's keep those transportation dollars here in Georgia. Let's build a strong infrastructure so that we have good solid roads, good solid things such as our water systems and our sewage systems, those types of things. We need to do that here in Georgia, and those are the kind of things that I fought for and will continue to fight for as the congressman of the 10th Congressional District.
Okay, thank you. What would be your plans to bring, federal funds back to Newton County to help make our county a better place to live, work, and play?
The best thing is to leave dollars in people's pockets here, particularly in our small businesses, but even the large businesses. We're taxed too much, we're regulated too much, we've got too much government, really at all levels. And the best thing to do is let's start reducing the size and scope of government. Let's keep in Newton County, money here in Newton County so that the citizens of Newton County can do what's necessary to have a stellar community here.
Okay, thank you. What is your views, or do you support term limits in Congress?
Well, the problem is not unlimited terms. I've got built-in term limits. I've already publicly pledged I will not stay in Congress 40 or 50 years, so it's just not going to happen. But the thing is, if we were operating according to what our founding fathers meant for the government to be, members of Congress in the House and the Senate would go to Washington just periodically. They would make sure we have a strong economy, make sure our money supply is good, and that we have a good, strong dollar. They would make sure that our borders are secure, that we have a strong military so that we have security and safety in our country. They would make sure that our foreign affairs are in the best interests of this nation. And then they go back home and they work at their regular jobs. And those are the types of things that I worked on when I was in Congress, what I'll work on again. And let me just give you a good example of that. When I was in Congress, I wrote a bill called the Department of Education Elimination Act. It took me 2 years to write it, Lanier, because the Department of Education, I call it the Department of Indoctrination, has so many tentacles throughout the federal government. We need to get rid of the Department of Education. Right now, today, we've got roughly 5,000 employees in the U.S. Department of Education in Washington, D.C., never taught a child to read. They're giving us the dictates from Washington, D.C. of how teachers teach here in Newton County. Let's get rid of that. Those nearly 5,000 employees make an average salary of $98,000 a year, plus their benefits, plus their retirement. Let's let them go find a real job. Let's keep that money here in Georgia. Let's let our teachers teach as they're trained to do, and stop indoctrinating our students in socialism, communism, progressivism, whatever you want to call it, because they're all the same. They're all Marxism. And let's have a world-class education system here in Georgia. And in fact, go further. I'd like to get rid of the Department of Commerce, the Department of Labor, and the EPA. Let's get rid of the IRS too. And we can do that. I've got a bill to do that as well.
Okay, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about inflation. And this question, I'm going to try to reword it a little bit, but the question is, at what point do you think the federal government should implement wage and price controls to slow down this increase in inflation? So I guess my question is, what is your views and how would you tackle the inflation?
Well, the federal government's response should be to get rid of the tax burden and the regulatory burden on business and industry. leave dollars in people's pockets. This inflation is caused by government. Ronald Reagan said, government is not the solution, it is the problem, and I agree with President Ronald Reagan. As I've already mentioned in my little opening dialogue, is that our inflation and the cost of living increase that we're all suffering from today is caused by this debt that's been created, frankly, by both political parties. And it's just got to stop. This debt is totally unsustainable. And what's happening is the Federal Reserve is buying the bonds that the federal government issues, and then the Federal Reserve is printing more and more dollars to pay for those bonds and to pay for the interest on the bonds. And that makes our dollars worth less and worth less and worth less. And we're headed towards our dollars being worthless. We need to get rid of the Federal Reserve. We need to go back to a gold and silver standard so we have some basis to our dollars, so we have sound monetary policy. We've got to deal with this debt that's just totally unsustainable. When a business gets, and I'm in business as a medical doctor, and I've had other non-medical businesses that I've been involved in, but what happens when a business gets in trouble financially? They tighten their belt, they get rid of assets that they can get rid of, they start living within their means, and that's what the federal government should do as well. I introduced the strongest balanced budget amendment to the Constitution that any Republican has introduced when I was there and since. I'll reintroduce that balanced budget amendment. I'll work to try to get the regulatory burden and tax burden off of people as well as businesses, so we have money in the pockets of people here in Newton County so that people can live their lives and not have all this government intrusion in their business or in their lives. So we need to let people run their lives without the federal government dictating how they're doing it. And I'm the only candidate in this race who has that proven history of being able to do that. How many times, Lanier, have we heard candidates give us all these magnificent promises? They give us all these promises, and then they go to Washington and do something totally different. That's the reason that Jim Jordan just put out a book, recently released, entitled, Do What You Said You Would Do. I did what I said I would do to people here. I've already represented Newton County as a congressman. I did what I said I would do, and I'll do it again. There are 4 questions that I use to evaluate all legislation to direct my vote. All 4 questions had to be yes. First, is it moral and right? Is it according to what our Creator tells us is correct? So is it moral and right? Secondly, is it constitutional according to the original intent? And people say that they're constitutionalists, but I've heard virtually every one of the candidates talk about how constitutional they are, but I've heard actually just today at a forum, all of my opponents that were there, all but one of us were there, all of them proposed federal policy that's not constitutional. You see, I use these 2 documents in everything that I do. God's inerrant word, the Holy Bible, and the Constitution of the United States as it was intended by our founding fathers. We need to send powers back to the states or the people as the 10th Amendment demands. And I'm the only candidate who has a proven history so that people can understand without a question. With me, it's not a guess, it's not a gamble. I've got the proven history, and the only one who has that proven history of voting according to these documents and according to the 4 questions. Again, is it moral and right? Is it constitutional according to the original intent? Do we need it, and can we afford it? All 4, if they were yes, I vote yes. If one was no, I voted no. MSNBC dubbed me as Dr. No. So, and I embrace that moniker because I didn't just vote no. I did a lot of very positive things when I was in Congress, and I'll continue to do that for the people here in Newton County of the 10th Congressional District of Georgia and America.
Okay, thank you. What's your view and how do you support voters' rights?
I'm involved with a group called Voter GA. It's a bipartisan group. We've got on vote. I'm not a member, but I've been involved with them for a long period of time. In fact, I'm going to be the lead plaintiff in a suit that there will be filing very shortly against our Secretary of State, where he's doing some very illegal activity that's going to affect this year's election. We need to make sure that everybody who is a legal citizens of Georgia can go to the polls and vote, make sure that those votes are free and fair and that they're auditable and that we can make sure that dead people don't vote multiple times, people from other districts, other states, other precincts even don't vote multiple times and we've seen a lot of it. There's a lot of fraud basically on both sides. There always have been. But I've been involved with Voter GA for a long time, and I will continue to be, to make sure that we have free and fair voting. And really the only way to do that is go to hand-marked ballots that are optically scanned and are tied to a voter to make sure that those voters are legal citizens of Georgia, of their precincts, and of America. And I'll do everything I can to make sure that that happens. The last thing we need to do is get the federal government involved in our elections here in Georgia, and I'll fight against that as well.
Okay, thank you. What would be your legislative goals if elected, and how would that impact the counties in your district?
Well, the first thing is we need to make sure that we never shut our economy and our country down like we have over the last 2 years. And as I've already mentioned, I get my seniority back. I was the chairman of the Science Investigations Committee, and with my seniority back, I should be able to get that chairmanship, and I'm uniquely qualified to do so because I'm a medical doctor, I'm a scientist, and chairman of that committee. What I will do is we'll have in-depth hearings to make sure we never close down our economy again. We'll look into Dr. Fauci and his connections with the Chinese Communist Party. Frankly, I think he ought to be tried for treason because he has already shown, we know without a question, that he's collaborating and conspiring with our enemies, our military enemies and our economic enemies, the Chinese Communist Party. Frankly, I think he ought to be charged for murder too because he has promoted policy that is actually causing people to die. We'll look into all the issues, the virus or viruses. There's actually some scientific evidence that there may be multiple viruses. We'll look at all these mask mandates, the shot mandates, everything, so the American people know the truth about COVID. We must never, ever allow this to happen again. The whole thing has been based on Dr. Fauci and the deep state's political agenda. This should never happen again. We'll use data, good, solid data, not fake science like he's using, and to make sure that that will never happen again. Plus, I'll reintroduce all of the bills, my Department of Education Elimination Act, my bill to get rid of the Fed, my bill to go to gold and silver standard, my bill to have the strongest balanced budget amendment. We've got to change the budgetary process. I've got hundreds of bills already ready to go on day one. And so I won't be a freshman. I'll be back in leadership and will be able to go to work for the people of Newton County, of the 10th District of Georgia, and the nation.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for answering all the top questions submitted by our citizens. At this time, can you close us out with any further information about yourself or your campaign that you'd like the voters to know and how they can get in touch with you?
Certainly. In fact, I'm the only candidate in this race that you can count on to do what he said he would do because I've already got that proven record. And how many times have we been burned by listening to people give us all these promises and then they go to Washington and they don't do that? In fact, right now today, we've got 3 members of the U.S. Congress that pledged when they were running they would not vote for John Boehner to be Speaker. I fought John Boehner as Speaker. I tried to keep him from being Speaker. But all 3 of these congressmen that are there today failed in that promise that they made to the people of their districts and of Georgia. This can't happen. With me, I've got that proven, conservative, Christian, original intent constitutional voting record. I was rated as the most fiscally conservative as well as the most conservative member of the entire U.S. House of Representatives. I won't be a freshman. I'll be back in leadership. I get my seniority back. We'll work real hard to put this country back on the right track. We're in a war in Washington, D.C. today, and I'm a U.S. Marine, and I tell people when they ask me, do you send people to the front lines of a fierce war who've never been to boot camp? No, of course not. In fact, I'm the only candidate who's been in the war. I've been in the front lines fighting for the people of this district, this state, and this nation, and I'll go back to work doing what I said I would do. Using those 4 questions. Is it moral and right? Is it constitutional according to the original intent? Do we need it? Can we afford it? is how I'll vote. I did what I said I will do. I'm going to do what I say today that I'm going to do, and you can count upon me. If you want somebody who's going to go to work in Washington that you don't ever have to doubt, because I've got that proven record. If you want to heal our land, do what you know that you need to do. Bring back Brown. I greatly appreciate your vote and your prayers. I appreciate y'all's help. You can check me out on my website, which is paulbroun.com. That's spelled Paulbroun. It's Brown with a U instead of a W. In fact, Lanier, when I first met my wife, I spelled my last name to her. She said, "How do you spell your first name? Pawl?" To try to freak everybody out. But anyway, it's paulbroun.com, paulbroun.com. You can volunteer, you can donate, you can come be part of Team Brown to try to heal America, to save our country for our future generations. Bring back Brown. Please vote for me on May 24th. And actually, you can do that right now through early voting. Bring back Brown.
Thank you.